what drives me crazy about college boards and how they approach a high school student's CV is they'll look at grade point average. Do they have any context on what the environment is, what they went through to get that 4.0 or that 3.0? And do they know what the trajectory of that GPA was? What if a candidate starts with a 2.6 and then has a 4.0 for 2 straight years and has an average of a 3.1? They could have missed what could be an incredible student because they're looking at a full 4 years. The collateral damage or impact of not taking that approach is severe. To let each division of the company, each function, try a 3-day work week. I would just say we don't need to create new metrics. Change metrics. You know what revenue is. You know what engineering is. You know what product is, Alex. You know what client services is. If we were to do 3 months, 6 months, same type of approach that we took last year and watch those metrics and they went up, why not?
Okay, welcome to the Digible Dudes podcast. I'm David.
I'm Reid.
Reid, we just did half a podcast with no one listening but ourselves. You thought the audience wouldn't want to listen to the multivitamins I'm taking now or other middle-aged male nutrition.
Kind of, I don't know how to put it, like kind of sad, pathetic trajectory, like where you start turning more and more to supplements and vitamins in hope of remaining vibrant.
Yeah.
I don't think that one, I'm not sure our producer would have allowed us to publish that one.
Yeah.
Not because it was R-rated or anything like that.
We would have had like 3 people really locked in, and then the other people been like, what podcast am I listening to?
Yeah, exactly.
They would have been like, I knew Reid was really into Huberman. I did not know he wanted to go head to head with him on a podcast.
God help me. Yeah, I'd really laugh if a couple days later, Lurch was like, I heard that podcast you guys did. Yeah, I bet you did. You were one of our 3. I knew you would be.
Yeah. All right. Well, anyways, today we thought we'd talk about maybe some of the content we're consuming and some of the stuff that you and I would normally share offline and maybe work out or work through together to see how it may be useful. So you just recently finished Adam Grant's book, Hidden Potential. And you said you gave me your review. I don't know if you want to give your highlight review here and then go into what you thought was interesting.
Yeah. Well, apologies, Adam Grant, but I think he took a step back with Hidden Potential, but the bar was pretty high. I still don't think he should be reading his own books, and maybe that sound mean, but
oh, you mean like the Audible?
Yeah, the Audible.
I usually love it when the author reads it, though.
I usually do too. Have you heard Adam Grant read a book?
Yeah, I did the other one.
And you would still
think again, yeah.
You would wish that he continue reading?
I don't remember. It didn't scar me so much that I even remember having an issue with that.
He has these moments where he like thinks something's really funny, and maybe it's just we don't have the same sense of humor.
Yeah.
There's, not to mention the voice, but like it's this enthusiasm that doesn't
translate for you.
Not for me. Yeah. So
when you would have the same problem if I read my own book.
Except and only and I'm not trying to be nice. Except whether they're funny or not, I really enjoy I don't even call them dad jokes, just Staley jokes. So therefore I think I could enjoy an audio book from you.
Okay. Thank you.
You're welcome. So I got that out of the way. But the reason I felt like it was a step back, as I was saying to you, is so the book, should start there. It's pretty self-explanatory, but it's about how you unlock the hidden potential in yourself or others. And I do appreciate the fact that it wasn't just a kind of self-help book, but it was also like, if you're managing someone, you're at a company, you're a mentor, how can you help, release or unlock, somebody's true potential, which was interesting timing because you've been telling me about Goggins for a few years. I never, spent any effort or time researching that guy, but in parallel, I was listening to Huberman's podcast, and he had Goggins on, which was, according to David, one of 2 podcasts he did for the entire year because he hates podcasts. And he put a couple F-bombs like on both sides of that, and he was, pointing that out. But he was also talking about unlocking potential and how he approached it, and dramatically different than how Adam Grant suggests you go about it. But I think we know Goggins is a 101, and so just recognizing that. So I was really curious. His first book, or I think it was his first book, was The Originals, Nonconformist, just how important that is and valuable to the world, and all these really interesting examples of entrepreneurs and others. And then he moved to Think Again, which was all about unlearning and rethinking, which we used for this year's Digital Summit. Was a big hit. I was trying to make sure I gave proper attribution, because I felt like at some points they were like, "This is brilliant." It's like, well, there's a book that we're borrowing from, with that theme. But it was nonetheless, it was a big hit, and I think there's always time and place for that. And he did a great job also in that one. I thought of some really great examples, and very categorically kind of how he approached that was awesome. So I was excited about Hidden Potential, and it for me fell a little flat because there was just so much anecdotal, and some of that is great, but talking about NASA, or this person's story, that person's story, this group's challenge and adversity they faced, and how they overcame it, and then some. There's a lot about this chess club in Harlem that stunned the world, and won one of these tournaments that people thought was an impossibility, given who they were up against. And none of that, like, I felt moments of inspiration and stuff like that, but he wasn't like saying, and there's all this research and data then to support, what happened. It was more like story after story, and then a lot less real science or social science. And so that was just one thing. I'm not trying to start with a negative that didn't work for me as much this time. What I didn't mention to you before we jumped on the podcast that I did appreciate, that gets back to kind of the grind, and I'm even asking it, or have, it's recency bias, I guess, but in some of my interviews that I've been on, is how, and you'd appreciate this because you have talked so long about the grit. Like, I want to find people that have grit, know what that really means. And I just tweaked to grind, and based on reading Grant's book as well as listen to Goggins, I've been asking, how do you approach the grind? And if somebody doesn't even know what I mean, can't understand that, that's a red flag. It's like, we all have to recognize, I would hope, the grind that comes with any job, but certainly a job, in the case I was interviewing for account managers, that's going to come with doing a lot of the same things over and over. And at some point, that turns into a grind. And there's a lot of different ways that people, and I'm sure you'll have an interesting answer to that, and how you approach that, or if you say it's kind of absent for me. But Adam Grant, bringing it back to Hidden Potential, says one of the best things you can do is form some type of deliberate play. And he was quick to qualify, this is not just some kind of, he didn't, maybe he did, because sometimes he does use the S word in our family. That's stupid. We try to stay away from that, but he does not shy away from that word. And I think he said, not some stupid gamifying silly game that really just means nothing and you'll stop doing after the second day. He's like, the deliberate play is more strategic. It's more really building some type of system, to improve yourself, and directly confront the grind. And it helped me. I'm a basketball fan, sports fan. He mentioned Steph Curry, who's the all-time 3-point king in the NBA, and has beat all odds based on his size, his being lightweight. Nobody thought he had a chance to really make it in college. And then he shined in college, and then he's become one of the greatest point guards that ever lived. And he was the example used for deliberate play. And he said, it's not fun shooting 500 balls a day. It's not fun running back and forth horse in the gym. The cuts, the things that professional athletes and the absolute best athletes in the world have to do. And so he hired a coach who had a system that he categorized as deliberate play, where he had different versions of all these drills that were so important for him that he would then compete against himself. And that kept Stephen Curry from really ever sinking into, kind of the doldrums of like the boredom, and I'm not really motivated. I don't want to do this. So I thought that was interesting. And he said that's something that really great employers should consider, and potentially bring into their organizations if they're starting to see some of the grind, the boredom get to their employees. So I like that. I thought that was cool, and I think there is some room for us with that. If you think about a lot of our employees, they've got to be facing that. And I don't know if they've heard operative word deliberate, thoughtful way about approaching and kind of creating a little bit more playful environment for themselves.
Yeah, like
I'll
basically.
pause there. Yeah, feel free to weigh in on that, and I'll get to a couple of the other takeaways.
Yeah, I feel so. I feel like there's actually a couple different versions of this that I've seen. So as you were saying, most jobs I had previously had some, stuff that became repetitive or boring or what have you, and I felt that people, in my experience, people that um, not quite were to the deliberate play, but they would make something of work like fun about it. So meaning they would still like maybe goof off or have some weird game. I think of like when I was doing Alex or head of products references, they were saying how he would had this like trash can basketball game or whatever that he would play and be like, okay, who can get the most points in 10 minutes or what have you. And so it's like he made something about like work kind of fun, like a silly game fun. That had nothing to do though with building product versus this is taking it a step further and saying, hey, try to make a game out of something that you also must do to become better at your craft, which definitely seems like even a better version of that. So it's interesting.
Yeah, interesting. I appreciated kind of maintaining. It felt like there's a element of competitiveness, and maybe it was because I was latching onto the specific example he used, but that would be uh, smart because you're trying to connect it to potential.
Yeah.
So it's not just a matter of how do you get through the grind, but you're also at the same time trying to extract the most value you can from either your brain or your body.
Hmm.
And briefly, detour back to Goggins, as I think I shared in Monday's roundup, and I again know you're more studied up on him than I am, but for him, he was like the grind isn't a grind. I just do. Everything's about just doing,
Hmm.
and so Huberman was like, "Was there a point though, like that you needed like some outside motivation? Did you watch Rocky?" I mean, he was just kind of joking, but he wasn't. Was there certain music? Was there this huge goal for you that you were in pursuit of? You
Hmm.
broke all these world records, and he's like, nope, no, no, or no. He said yes. As I was making that transformation from 300-pound lazy,
Hmm.
expletive, I did need more of that, and I used it, and then it ran its course. And I was admiring. He even mentioned Elias from Platoon, like the movie character, as well as the Rocky, and then Michael Jordan. He had
Hmm.
like some fictional and non-fictional, like kind of people that he looked up to as the ultimate badass.
Hmm.
And he's like, and I was trying to kind of take pieces of all of that, and eventually I did kind of become that ultimate badass, and I no longer was looking for other identities or
Hmm.
ways to motivate me. And then taking a step further and more where he's at today, and he's been for the last decade, has just been embrace the suck. It's just you just do it, and if you're willing to put on a daily basis for the effort to do things you don't want to do, then you have the best chance of extracting your full potential again through your brain and through your body. But
And that's
that's
Goggins, or
that's
that's
Goggins. He's
okay.
like, that's a big gradient. He said every day for me, and that's where it started to feel a little, I guess, cynical. But he was like, I'm doing virtually everything I do. This podcast, he was like, okay. He's like, I don't want to do it.
Hmm.
I don't want to get out and run. I don't want to, do a bunch of pull-ups. I don't want to speak at these conferences. But I just keep building up my willpower. And that's when Huber made, some kind of scientific connection, which I won't go that far. So that was Goggins, but bringing it back to hidden potential, he talked a lot more about kind of how powerful the belief of somebody that you respect is to somebody's potential. So for me and you, just I hope is an okay example, but we're big supporters of each other, and if you were to try a new venture and and it was something I knew a little bit about, as well as, the respect we have for each other, that would really help you reach that potential and achieve that goal. What was interesting though is he said what's even more powerful is if somebody ignorant, you don't know, doesn't really know about this new venture, doubts you. That's even more powerful, proven to be more powerful, more of an indicator that you're going to succeed. And the theory, social science behind it is that it is even more motivating when somebody that doesn't know what they're talking about doubts you, um, in a big goal that you're seeking or a venture. So he used the example of, and you may know this woman, but she uh, is one of 13 that have done, I guess, all the summits, like the highest summits in the world. And it was very public when she went up with a group of women. So it was the first time that a group of women had tried to summit Everest, and it's highly, highly publicized. And they failed. And she was devastated. She knew how public it was, and she was thinking, I'm probably not going to do this again. It was really hard to stomach. And she said it was actually all the social media blowback from people that weren't climbers, didn't know anything about it, many were men, weren't even women, all this like shots at her. And she was just explaining it to Adam Grant in an interview, and said that that was more motivation than I can explain. And it
Became
was the
fuel.
fact that, yeah, that they were so ignorant and didn't know, that ate at me more than maybe somebody that, it's just somebody I expect saying, you can do this. In both cases, they help as far as reaching potential. But the theory from the book is that when you're, I guess, challenged or ridiculed, criticized, doubted, by, you know, an ignorant faction or whatever, that you're more likely to achieve a goal.
And does that apply even if you know the person? Like all these stories about like my dad said I couldn't do it, therefore.
No,
Okay.
no. He seemed to really make a distinction that these would not be people in your network.
Okay.
So there's that. And then,
So the moral of that story is go online and start flaming people and being like, you can't do it.
I was laughing before you got to the end of that. I hope people still caught what you said, but
Yeah.
I wanted to make sure you got your Staley,
Thank you.
yeah,
Thank you.
humor in there.
Yeah, I'm just gonna start trolling people because I know I'm doing good with the world.
Yeah, right. Exactly. You could really game that.
Yeah.
So, this one is just a fun fact, and I know we pretty much give our permissions for any detour here on the podcast. But I had not heard, maybe you had because you laid down all sorts of facts like this, but do you know which country has performed consistently the best on educational, I guess, um, I'll just say assessments? So, performance, education, and performance. Which country over the last 20 years has dominated?
Is this something that Courtney planted to see if I would screw up on some harassment training?
Maybe.
I'm not gonna. I don't
know. Yeah, I won't answer for you or what
Okay.
you might have answered. But he doesn't mind. It's not the, to fully stereotype, but he's like, so if you were to guess, because I think he sets it up as a question too, that it was somewhere in Asia or maybe in India or in Germany, you'd be wrong, and definitely not the United States. He's like, we've done nothing but regress over the last 2 decades. It's the Finnish. It's Finland. And so even more interesting is in the 70s, Finland was middle of the pack, if not at the bottom quartile. So Adam Grant, when he saw this, was like, that's kind of random. There it is. There's Germany. There's Japan. There's China. But Finland's right there on the top. So he dug into it, all connecting to hidden potential. What was it that a country, not just an individual, discovered that changed the trajectory of their, performance on these education assessments. And there were several things that, surfaced, but the one that stood out the most that I thought you'd find fascinating, and you're a little ways away with Griffin, but we're in the middle of this with our kids, is guess what the average amount of number of years, and I'm kind of already blowing this, but number of years that a Finnish student K through 12 spends with the same teacher.
I mean, I just have to assume it's a lot.
Yes, that's why I kind of blew that.
Well, I think it's more of any time. Well, of course, when you ask the question, it'd be like 3 weeks.
Yeah, right.
You'd be surprised to know. I actually have heard good things about the schools in the U.S. that do stuff like that.
Yeah, when I mentioned it to Miranda, she shared some of that, the same thing, and she's like, and there's some schools that is their system, and maybe they did, borrow that or pick that up more than we know from Finland, because this started in early 2000s apparently when they went on this run, and they're still there. And what they found out was, or he found out, is that the average timeline is 6 years. That's the average that a kid between K and 12 spends with the same teacher. And there's like I said, other elements less interesting, but that one stood out. And he said what was really fascinating is that the teacher, you'd see what might be baselined or evaluated as an average teacher becoming a great teacher. Also, so not just the student benefiting, back to like kind of where you see mutual potential unlocked, but certainly the student. And we talk all the time about smaller classroom versus larger, and he said you might be surprised to find out average classroom in Finland is 30. It's not 10.
Wow. So
he's like, so that was kind of fun to hear, is that this isn't all about just having this really intimate, like teaching environment. It was really the relationship building, understanding the way David learns versus Reid learns, and starting to just craft that. The more you build a relationship.
So can we apply this to our management?
Well, that's what I told Nicole.
Oh, yeah.
I was like, so I won't name names, but I was like, there's people that I think need to stay together.
Yeah.
And they're going to stay that way for as long as they're digital.
For about 6 years. And then they'll have 30 reports.
Right, exactly.
They'll get very good, though.
Yeah, I was going to say, but we'll get the most out of them. All right. So I'm building up because I'm going to somewhat, I think this is in threes for you. My biggest takeaway, the one I appreciate the most, that I told you, you said at this point, maybe we should go ahead and talk about this on the podcast, which is related to hiring. And so maybe this is a good cutout or segment for Darren that will be most applicable to our audience and listeners, if they're still with me, still with us. Hiring's such a challenge, right? And breakthrough for us, hashtag attribution, David Staley, on sourcing the Who book for us, which has been so valuable. Really love that. Now it's almost fully baked into our greenhouse, ATS system. But what the Who book does not account for in any way, because I did kind of do a cross reference here, that Adam Grant says is so valuable, and I'll use the phrase that he repeated, is the distance traveled for a candidate. How much is that considered in a hiring process? And so his great example here was an astronaut that started as a migrant worker picking cranberries in Mexico. Forget his name, but he was an avid learner. He was incredible, athlete. He had what would seem like some pretty amazing abilities and a good head on his shoulders, and more importantly, he had this extraordinary commitment and conviction to becoming an astronaut. But let's be honest, there's lots of kids that grow up and say, I want to be an astronaut, or I'm going to be an astronaut. I don't know if he set the record for rejection, but he applied several times in the 90s, rejected. And he was hiding some of his background because he was worried that the the
Mm-hmm.
whether he would be viewed as somebody who couldn't assimilate, had too big of differences, and some of the technical requirements and mathematical and all this stuff, and so he didn't disclose that. And the guy that eventually did move him into the astronaut program had remembered him, and he said, it's a shame because NASA actually allowed us to do more probing on deep backgrounds, things that maybe might be a little off limits, especially thinking in today's world, HR, can you ask if you came from a broken home, just
Mm-hmm.
by example. And we used to really thrive on that in our process, but they moved us to full standardization in the spirit of equity, which is what Nicole and I discussed pretty intensely this morning, which I support. But in trying to create something that has max equity, and then the standardization for scalability,
Mm-hmm.
you can lose invaluable, according to Adam Grant, context on a candidate. And specifically, he said performance. He's like, so you might see that David, set the world record for, running on a treadmill. Uh, but what you might not know is that he has metal in his right leg, and then somebody else did it.
Mm-hmm.
If you don't know about the metal in his leg, or
Mm-hmm.
that he fractured his hip in a car accident or something, then you're missing a really important piece. Bring it back to the astronaut guy. There was way more to it than that. But because they weren't aware, he just kept getting rejected. So then he goes out, runs, you'll appreciate this, ran a marathon sub-7, which, not everybody
Solid.
can do that.
Yeah.
Yeah. Sub-7 splits. And he learned Russian. Only he entered like some program that, God, I'm trying to remember what the project was, but he only took it. He said, "I'm only going to volunteer for this project if I can learn Russian." So, I mean, he was just doing extraordinary things, and that distance traveled. If you didn't understand that with him, and you strictly just looked at the surface with him with another candidate, and looked at a resume, asked standard questions, you'd really miss that. And so he is suggesting you're going to see similar candidates. And I did think, I'm certainly not naming names, but I had a couple of interviews with strategic AMs, one of which had their version of the migrant to the astronaut story. And trying to, I wasn't as impressed as another candidate who I thought had this huge upside, and reminded me of a few, I'll keep the names again out of it, of our employees that are terrific. And then I thought about this element of distance traveled, and I would choose, if, and I really think I would now, based on what I read and heard from Hidden Potential, that he also says it's not just about fun, good stories, it's that they're more likely to succeed. So if you stop short and put most of your focus on experience, performance, and even the 5 F's from the Who, family, fit, finance, freedom, all that stuff, and lose and miss out, you have you're less likely to see somebody, or you're more likely to overlook the better candidate. So he's not, I'll wrap it up here and let you comment, but he's not suggesting it's the end all be all, but it's an invaluable aspect, or could be, of our hiring process. He does say in grades, he's like kind of connected this, but you might appreciate this too. He's like, what drives me crazy about college boards and how they accept, or how they approach, a candidate, not a candidate, but a high school student's CV, is they'll look at grade point
Mm-hmm.
average. Do they have any context on what the environment is, what they went through to get that 4.0 or that 3.0, and do they know what the trajectory of that GPA was? So what if a candidate starts with a 2.6 and then has a 4.0 for 2 straight years and has an average of a 3.1?
Mhm.
They could have missed what could be an incredible student,
Mhm.
at Harvard,
Mhm.
because they're looking at a full 4 years. So still somewhat connecting to distance travel. Shut up now, but I thought it was pretty cool, and I'd like Nicole and Courtney to try to find a way for us to squeeze in something related to the context behind, our candidates.
Would you say in all situations you would take distance traveled then? Or would it be kind of like we've talked about Rodman, where it's like you can have one Rodman on the team, for example? So,
I would say that, uh, I'm I think we're both, I don't know if skeptics at heart is the right way of putting it, but I'm not one to, you know, I guess hear one anecdote. I do get excited about some of the stuff I read, but, I try to make sure I really think through the applications of it. And so I'm just trying to be, honest and thoughtful about my response here. No, I would not put that above all else. But I feel like based on what I heard, and there's a lot of logic in it, that I think it absolutely belongs in the key consideration set, key criteria that, especially if I'm looking, and I think that's where he was trying to say, hey, if there's a tiebreaker, I mean,
right,
he went
right.
farther than that. He did go farther than that, but he definitely would say if you have two similar candidates, because he started to talk affirmative action. He was like, it's kind of the spirit of, like, people don't like that. It's like, but if you think about it, they're really trying to capture distance traveled and giving people that have the same SAT score the opportunity.
Yeah.
Wasn't as easy for them as it was for the privileged white kid, that had money.
Yeah. Yeah, I mean, I understand all of that, and I think, depending how you define distance traveled, like, it sounds like this through line for him, or as I'm interpreting it by the story, is more like total life distance traveled, versus distance traveled in a position.
Correct.
Yeah, because I was
But
thinking.
he did hit a little of that too. So it's like, if, in the case, I think I can still leave
Yeah.
if you don't mind real quick, but the on the senior AM position, there were two candidates that their most recent position was essentially the same.
Mhm.
And if you look at, maybe I'm still going a little further back than you're saying, but if you look at the distance to get to that position, even within the last 3 to 5 years, in comparison, one had a lot further distance to travel.
Right. It's like a most improved award. If
Yeah,
you got a most improved award, I would put it in my resume. So I also believe it's probably you, us, or whoever using this would be, what are you hiring for? So to your point earlier about grit, or would you change your grind? Something like light, meaning over the totality of your life, distance traveled, um, would probably be a good indicator of that. Similar to how, like, they will say if you want to hire someone for grit, look for endurance athletes or solo sports people or something. Um, so I could see it like, okay, does this position need a lot of grit or, grind? Okay, then this might be something we want to weight higher for that scorecard, right?
mhm,
Because that's one of
mhm,
the things with, like, how do we make sure this is as objective as it can be? And then, from the what I do like, from at least if you're honing in on positions with people, the who books question is, what were you hired for, and what was your outcome? So at least then you could see distance travel. It's hard to bring in 100 grand. I brought in 500 grand. Okay, great. That's major distance traveled. Like,
mhm,
so, you know, um, touche, could be a good fit. And then, I also know that what you're talking about adds to diversity and cultural add, which is something that we found very important too. So you're not just finding the, mirror images of things. What has been somewhat challenging for me at times is, I guess, still, and I haven't settled on that question myself, as far as, this kind of, profile or conditions or whatever really perform. So it's almost like if you were to hire from the same, like, oh, if we recruit people from that company, they come in here and day one, they crush it, right? As everyone, all the books say, it's like, well, then you're really lacking diversity because you're fishing in the same pond all the time.
mhm, mhm.
So that's where I personally would, need to get settled on how much you go to a known this will work versus how many sort of scratch lotto tickets might you take. And I wouldn't imagine we'd want to say 100% scratch lotto tickets, but there's got to be something there, and then that's probably back to hidden potential, right? Because it's the whole title of the book is hidden, right? And so you don't only put bets out there.
Yeah, I think he described that specific chapter as uncut gems. And I think the framework we have, I'll say for Digible with the who is what would give us some assurance that we're not all scratch off lottery tickets. It's like you still have to go through, a good, thoughtful, strategic process. But we'll try to find different versions of uncut gems instead of, if we happen to discover like this one company or this one subset, we could just keep going back and back and back again, because eventually that does become the other thing we've talked about many times on the podcast, is just the group think and the cloning, and not really the additive culture that we're shooting for. The thing that I wish as we talk through this, that it connected a little more with, that we've also spoken about, and I know if Janet's listening, she's been amazing. Now I feel like could be a great facilitator if she's not, on 6 Types of Working Genius. But we tenacity is in that, and it doesn't really, it's not defined the way this distance traveled is. I don't know if I can make the connection, because also in these interviews I did throw that hot potato at him, or whatever, pop quiz. Can't believe I'm quoting Speed.
Pop quiz, hot shot. If Nicole's listening,
yeah, exactly.
That'll be a test. Like now we'll know if she actually listens.
Yeah,
to
totally.
This.
It's our own version of what is it? Some sort of casserole that Erica put.
Exactly.
But if you know what I mean, where it's like when we think tenacity related to 6 Types of Working Geniuses, it's more like getting stuff done. It's not like being tenacious. And to me, that lines up well with that story of this guy. He was like, no matter what, like, and a Goggins, almost type mindset, just so intense, to get there, and that usually comes with more distance traveled. My last thing on this that I just thought you'd appreciate, ponder on, is what if private equity firms, strategics, were to consider this, prioritize it, similar to how we would with a candidate. If you're buying a company and you overlook distance travel, because you can do the quick, and everybody does. Are you bootstrapped or are you ventured? Oh, we like bootstrap because they're gritty, But I think the point of this book is like, you got to go deeper than that to really fully understand the distance traveled. And so, would it bear out the way Adam Grant suggested when it comes to the professional world? I mean, we're still talking professional, but in a business sense, where it's like, if you really pay attention to that, you're more likely to get it right on that horse versus a venture backed or bootstrap that actually just had daddy's money. It's like, really understand that story, and you're more likely to get it right on who you buy.
I can't speak about anecdotes with private equity, but I have heard that with venture firms, that they will consider a lot of that story, and particularly the team, because they want to see, they enjoy often seeing that founding team has gone through some adversity, because it shows that they're like, okay, they won't just like crack it first shot. And they famously, the Airbnb story gets quoted a bunch of times, because it's like, they made cereal in order to fund the Airbnb, like that kind of thing. So I wouldn't be surprised if some of that traveled to private equity, but definitely on the venture side of things, it's something that is like part of the sizzle slide.
Yeah.
Your whole thing with your setup with hidden potential, where you said you felt there were more anecdotes than as much hard research as you had felt from the prior books, made me wonder. Just open up the conversation for how much are you currently feeling we should be orienting for this is 100% known scientific test versus makes a lot of sense. Let's go that way. And I think this, like you and I, like as we were talking offline and joked a little bit as we got online here about nutrition, it's like Peter Attia recently, I heard an interview with him where he was like, I used to think saunas just felt good and didn't have whatever. He's like, there's still no like A/B tests of sauna work, but he's like, the evidence looks pretty good. Use a sauna. And that's how I can feel with some of this stuff that you're talking about with hidden potential, where it's like it's impossible to do a perfect test of this. And so therefore, could you somehow define where you currently sit on that spectrum?
Yeah, the timing of this question is pretty classic. The reason I say that is because I've been I don't know if crusade's the right word, with, and you've certainly been privy to some of this yourself, either sitting in meetings with me recently or even between the two of us. But where I'm going is the value statement versus just the logic, and it seems similar to me here. It's like, so you don't, in a way, and just for our listeners, we got a lot of business cases and requests. A lot of them were pointed at payroll in 24. I need this to get this done or to hit that next level. And so in the past, we've always required the business case, and it's usually, share the logic with me, put it in a Google Doc, whatever. But what we didn't do was get scientific and put our lab coats on and say, I need a value statement, not just logic. And that's, in essence, isn't it, your question, which is like, at what point do we require data, or is it necessary for us to really adopt some of these things versus just take the logic, some of these anecdotes. And my that's why I said it's classic, because right now I'm not accepting logic. So therefore, if I said, I'm okay with the blend, again, we'll see who's listening. But to directly answer, which I rarely do, but you always come behind me and offer that up if I don't. I would say I'm going to live in the middle, um, because I do think there's something to be said for intuition, that's supported by anecdotes, evidence, books, that doesn't have thousands of studies behind it, oceans of data, and you know not everybody's equipped, I'll say, to toggle back and forth, or account for both of those. And I'm not saying I'm unique and that I can, but I'm more inclined to at this point, I guess, in my life, when the content I'm consuming, the company that we're building. I mean, you and I bring this up a lot when we get into these book reviews and talk about, the content, the frameworks that we're trying to not just rinse and repeat or lift and plug or whatever, that we're trying to take from a lot of different frameworks, and not just because it's an ego thing and it needs to be our own, because some of it is very much just like the Who book. We're not veering EOS, we're not reinventing EOS, but there are tweaks, there are little adjustments that we've made to some of these frameworks and content that we consume. And I love that. That's one of my favorite parts of company building, is us having the freedom to not fully adopt, somewhat adopt, dismiss, ignore, test, all these different concepts, and see where we find success. So that's more how I feel about it, whether it's Hidden Potential or some of the other books we've read.
Yeah. Well, a couple comments for how I think about this is, one is, as you said about Goggins, and he's a person of one. With ultra running, they always say it's an experiment of one, meaning like what works for me for fuel and nutrition wouldn't work for you. And so no matter what the studies say, you still have to do what works for you. And I believe that for a company as well. It's like, no matter what the studies say, you got to do what works for that organization. That doesn't mean that you don't, try to take from other people's learnings, and which is what I love about our culture, is that, like, let's try to learn from other people and then question it, ask why 5 times or what have you, and then let's make a decision. As far as the data, non-data, for me, it comes down to a couple things. One is this a one-way door? Like, you can't unwind it. So, like, let's just say, uh, we saw a study that said, you know what, Digital, if you went from a 4-day work week to a 1-day work week, you'd be even more productive. Now, if we were like, that feels like a pretty serious consequence to attempt, and it's like you're betting the company on it, right? And so it's like, all right, if we're not willing to peel this back after an experiment or something because it goes wrong, then that's where I would need some pretty freaking hard data. So one-way doors would make it hard for me. The other one would be like, can I live with the risk? So you and I recently talked just offline about getting like a full body health scan, and what I asked you is like, if you got the scan and it said you were A plus, prime meat, like, are you good to go? And you're like, yeah, I can accept the risk that I spent X to get whatever, that kind of clean bill of health. So I think that for me, and that's what, if I'm one of our listeners, it's because I look at it like you often talk about seasonality, market conditions. What about that property profile? So even with as much data as we have, that anybody in this industry has, every property is kind of a snowflake. And
It's like their
so,
own blood work.
yeah, their
Yep.
own blood work. And so you can say, like, I've got pretty good data that says this is probably going to work, but experiment of one might not. And so you can try it. And then it's just being willing to live with the risk of what you're trying. So if it was like, you're going to sign a 10-year contract on this like marketing campaign, it's like, all right, that's probably too much of a commitment to say like that you're going to bet it on a property. But anyway, so that's where I'm going, is I think like the more data you have, for me, the more likely I would accept maybe like a lesser outcome, to say like, hey, I've got all this data, it shows a 10% lift. Okay, great. Versus like, my intuition says this makes a lot of sense. I don't have a ton of data on it, but it looks like it might be a 200% lift. But by the way, I can live with the risk that it doesn't work. And if it doesn't work, I will turn it off.
Mm-hmm.
Right.
Mm-hmm.
Like, I don't know. I was thinking like TikTok or Spotify, or these things that sometimes don't have the same, data afterwards to support, like, did that equal new leases or not?
A lot of those.
Yeah, so that's where I currently sit with this data versus logic versus anecdote. And I have to be willing to accept if it doesn't work out, that I either will pull it back or that it's lost. It's like, all right, versus getting the sunk cost fallacy and just keep following it along.
100%. And that's where the test and learn, and then validate. You don't always hear the V part of that test and learn, but that's the whole idea, right? Back to us wearing lab coats, which I joked, I think it was with Lurch this morning, but I was like, each quarter you're going to see me in a white coat now, because I'm getting scientific on this shit. As far as all these business cases, I just need to, like, because I told him, it was like the collateral kind of damage or impact of not taking that approach is severe. The bigger you get, the more of those experiments and tests that you want to support. If you end up doing that too quickly and not having the theories that then you can validate or dispel. This is
if anybody can hear this, for getting like this laptop, someone's logged into it, I guess, for the podcast, and someone was just Slack calling.
That was a new one.
Yeah, we could have conferenced them in.
Yeah, that would be a funny. And now I don't know if I can, speaking of experiments, do different things to distract you or people to distract us, and see how unflappable we are.
Yeah, you did good there. You waited.
I was hanging in there a little bit.
Seconds.
I almost kept going, but then I was like, enough. Tiger Woods, that was part of, I don't know if you knew that, how they say he was great as he was, his dad would do some pretty obnoxious things to him while he was putt growing up. And so it's like, there's nothing my son can't handle.
That's interesting. Yeah, that's smart. And Nicole was often, one of her programs, coaching programs, was talking about the whole gorilla with the basketball teams passing in basketball.
Yeah. I need to show that to my daughters. I'd be super interested to see if they catch that. I was too been tipped off, so it was easier for me. I just have to tell you, because I think it'll entertain you, but as you said, if we saw data that said one day a week, would drive our performance, whatever, I think I'd have to, I'm paraphrasing, but I would pause. I recently thought about 3 days a week. So I know you get, I think, amusement, kick out of some of these questions I pose, but one of the ones that you and I have talked about a few times, at least last year we did, is who decided one-on-one should be every 7 days?
Mhm.
And I've posed that to some managers. And we've been more, I think, open, at least with the executive team, about keep the cadence you got to keep.
Mhm.
You and I know which meetings we shouldn't miss with each other and which ones we're a little more flexible with. Um, so why four? Why why wouldn't we explore three? And I know, generally speaking, this is just to be provocative. Why not three? But we haven't stress tested when does this not work. So many of the theories that we put forward in going to four did bear out. So back to experimentation, right? I think rather than just give some of the obvious reasons, unless you want me to, or you're going to offer them up on why we wouldn't go to three, I'm merely trying
Mhm.
to make the point that if you found success in shortening your week, how do we know? What if it's 3.5? I still think that this calendar, whether it's one-on-ones or in our case, something much bigger, which is a 4-day work week, that it's still a little arbitrary to me. And if you believe in all the research that we consumed and circulated before we made the change, a lot of consultants, whether it's your McKinsey or whoever that has done their analysis on time management, indicate that 80% of most work weeks are wasted. So therefore, shouldn't we get to at least 20% of a work week if we were optimally efficient? Sounds ludicrous, but just trying to make the point.
Mhm.
Maybe we're still wasting a lot of time here on a 4-day work week that if we really wanted, and then how much energy, and that's always been the relationship. It's like, I give you another day back. Am I already maxed out on how much energy I get by giving
Right.
you 3-day work week? What if I gave you 4? Would David be even more awake, more committed, just
Mhm.
killing it when he came in? Or did we already max out?
Yeah, I think it also depends on what metric you are talking about or care about, right? Because if let's just
100%.
go back to the 1 day work week, I would have to back to essentialism. I
Yeah.
would cut everything out, which means I would feel basically zero connectivity to my coworkers,
Mhm.
right? And I would have none of those relationships because I'd be all effing productivity. And now maybe great, we got the same productivity out of David, but what else does that mean? It's like, am I less likely to leave the company? Well, maybe because I can't get a 1 day work week somewhere else, but not because of coworkers. And we usually hear you stay at a company for the people, not, yada yada. So it's like, what are we optimizing for? If in that sense, unless it was more, if the company was like, we assume you can work another job then to make up whatever else income. So we'll pay you less
Mhm.
to do this
Mhm.
1 day a
Mhm.
week, which then starts again, maybe to be counterproductive to whatever metric we're optimizing for, because maybe now they are more transient. Like someone's like, you know what, I ended up getting a full-time job that I'm pretty satisfied with my coworkers and stuff versus the 1 day I really lock in with you guys. I don't know anybody and I'm just a freaking conveyor belt. Um,
I
so who
would,
knows?
can I answer that?
Sure.
I mean, not that you posed it directly as a question, but you said, what metrics would we be optimizing for? Um, Opcom, scoreboard, scorecard. It's like, that's our desert island. It's like the
Hmm.
health of the business. And so, what would be really fascinating is, and I know we're not going to do this, even though, you know, I was a little tempted, but is to let each division of the company, each function, try a 3-day work week.
Hmm.
And I would just say, we don't need to create new metrics, change metrics. We just established this. So you know what revenue is, what engineering is, what product is, Alex, what client services is. And if we were to do 3 months, 6 months, same type of approach that we took last year and watch those metrics and they went up, why not?
Yeah, I mean, that would be if we have extreme confidence that we have the right metrics, right? And that it's the whole
Yeah.
unintended consequence. And
Yeah. And yeah, I'll save some of this, I'll say, fodder or for offline with you.
Yeah.
Because
It's all super interesting. I think like what we and many other people get stuck in, including again our listeners, is that oftentimes people will compromise and they won't know very specifically like this is what I'm optimizing for, and they're like, it hits 3 buckets, cool, it's good enough, right? So I think that's also important to get settled on, whether it's as a human or a company or whatever, as your strategy. Um, yeah, just to know like it's back to your outcome, because if you have 3 buckets, you probably are pressing people to say like, what one bucket are you trying to move the needle on? Not like what 3 might you kind of together move the needle on.
100%. And I hope your wife doesn't mind me being Nicole weave this in, but she and I had this exact kind of exchange about performance reviews being moved to a set annual like cadence versus anniversary based. And so I'm hoping, Nicole, if you're listening, that you'd be up to getting on the podcast with me and David and getting into this conversation, because it was really, I mean, I think we both enjoyed it, but we really got into what's the ultimate outcome here, because she was mentioning there's these 3-4 things like,
Right.
and so it all sounded, I was like, these are great theories. What's the real outcome?
Right.
And
Right.
is it, a better employee experience?
Right.
Is it financial for the business? Is it we're going to gain back some time?
Yeah.
And all of those were on the list, but it's like, what's that number one outcome?
Right.
What would make this a home run, as you like to say? And I think it's an interesting one, back to like some of the stuff we do here, company building, talking, those kinds of things that probably resonate on some level with people. Obviously tune into the cast as they're doing performance reviews. They're certainly hiring people and trying to unlock, as much of that hidden potential as they can. So hopefully there's some value in today's podcast.
Well, good, decent book review, good food for thought.
Decent.
For anybody well,
What
yeah,
do
I haven't read the
need to
book,
get
so it's hard for me to like say grade A. You got it.
I thought you were going to give me a good thumbs up.
Yeah, well, I was impressed. You didn't have any of your Evernote out today. You just like went right off the cuff, which is solid. But great conversation. I enjoyed it.
Distance traveled.
Distance travel.
No Evernote.
Yeah, Reid has had a lot of distance travel. All right, all. We'll see you next time.